Okay. Take two. Hello and welcome to Have You Eaten Yet? My name's Josna Shimoga, for those of you who don't know me, and this is Shashank Shimoga, my younger brother. And honestly, this podcast has been in the works for years. A couple of years ago, I was going through a really transformative phase of life. I was living overseas, I was going through a breakup, and there was just so many questions in my mind. I was looking for familiarity. I was looking for people who had shared experiences and were telling their stories, and I just couldn't find one. And it was simple things, right? It was like people writing into other podcasts about, I've just had a breakup, what should I do? Mm-hmm. And those answers and those responses didn't even apply to me, because there was that cultural nuance that was missing in the answer and the solution. And I was parched. I was really, really parched for a voice that represented my story. And as the years went on and I talked to more and more people about it, I found out that actually this was a common experience. And a lot of people were having these thoughts and feelings and sentiments. So I thought, why not? Let's create a voice. And despite that, I sat on this idea for months and months and months, and something was missing and I didn't know what it was. And I've recently discovered it was having a co-host. And who better to co-host with than your younger brother? Mm-hmm. Welcome.
And thank you. And as the audience would know, like with most of your life, very hard to get things done without me. So here we are.
Relax. I was fine for the first 7 years before you came along. But that's actually a good place to start. I am 7 years older than you, and I was born in Bangalore in India, and we came to Australia in 1998 when I was 3, and it was just me, my mum, and my dad for quite a few years there, until I threw multiple temper tantrums for a baby brother, and my parents were like, we can't guarantee that. That's not in our control. And I was like, don't care, not my problem. I want a baby brother, make it happen. And a year later, you were born. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, I was born here.
Yep.
And went to school here, lived my whole life here. So I don't know anything else outside of what life was from 7 years on to you guys moving here.
Yeah.
So I think because of that, it really struck a lot of conversations between us, because even though on face value we have the same parents and we technically on paper should have had the same childhood, we didn't.
No.
And we went on a trip together recently. I think was kind of the catalyst for doing this together, because we always had deep, insightful conversations, but as our relationship grew over the last probably 4 or 5 years, we've really kind of gotten into our childhoods, why we think differently, and there's so many reasons for that.
Yep.
And I think this is a good platform to like discuss that, because as everyone experiences, we all have different perspectives, even though you might have had the identical experience.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So this is needed.
No, exactly. Yeah. And the more you've talked to your friends, I've talked to my friends, and it doesn't have to be of Indian background, any sort of immigrant background that you come from. We actually share very similar experiences. But I think there's one unique element to being an immigrant in Australia, as opposed to some of the other countries that our cousins have gone to. We have similarities, and we were all colonized by the British. But outside of that, I think Australia is relatively a newer country in this, obviously in this modern colonized context. It is a newer country. Before that, it has a very rich culture, which is another can of worms. But when we moved here, we had to adapt to modern Australia and modern Australian culture, which didn't really exist. I don't think eating Vegemite or throwing shrimps on the barbie is a culture. It's elements of a culture, but it's not a culture. And then when you come from a country that does have really strong tradition, rituals, like systems in place for thousands and thousands of years, it's hard to let go of that, but not have something to quite hold on to in place of it. And hence, I think all of us have been carrying this burden of balancing very conflicting cultural identities. And as a consequence, I feel like when we were growing up, we were perhaps maybe one person at home and one person outside of home, or we couldn't truly be ourselves in either of those environments, and that the burden of balancing those two identities rested on each of us as individuals from a very young age.
Yep.
And that has consequently had an impact on what our belief systems are. Where do our values come from? Why do we think the way we do? Why do we believe in things the way we have so far? And I don't know about you, but it really took that very deep, transformation phase of my life to question, wait, where do I get that value from? Where did it actually come from? Somebody just told me that that's what we believe and I've accepted it, but does it actually serve me any longer? And I've truly never taken the time to reflect on that until I hit that low in my life.
Yep.
And since then, it seems to be a common experience.
Yeah, actually, me too. Like, I've been in my early 20s, being in my early 20s now, it's really the time where I've started to question my values and my decision-making processes and why I do things a certain way. Having recently finished uni, last 3 years, traveled to 20 plus countries, in the process of getting admitted to be a lawyer, full-time job, like all these things. And every decision I take now, I'm questioning why. And not in a bad way, but it's really driven me to go, okay, I need to know what is driving these decisions and thinking processes. And that applies from everything to a career move, to a job, to partying and drinking and whatever it is. I'm like, okay, why do I need to do that? Why is that important to me?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And things could have been very different for us if our parents haven't moved here. It was a sliding doors or butterfly effect, whatever you want to call it, right? Because one person met another person and then introduced them to this opportunity, and then my dad was there at the right time, at the right place, and even our dad meeting our mom at that time, and what I mean? There was so many things that have played into why we are here today.
Yeah.
I think we should share our story from the start. And if you relate to any element of that story, if you think that was my journey too, or very similar journey, or I too have been reflecting on some of these points and asking myself these questions, then this is the space for us. And I really think that it could be a very powerful space to share our stories. We're going to share ours today, but in the future, what we want to do is talk to our friends, our community, and hear more stories about people doing things differently. Because for the first time, especially as an immigrant woman, for the first time, I have a choice in how my life looks, and I don't have to go down that traditional path of getting married and having children if I don't want to. And similar to you, I think there was this mindset of survival and being a provider as a man. And although those things do still exist in our community, in our culture, there's still more choice and freedom and option and partnership between future partners and relationships, rather than it being so solely divided into roles and responsibilities. So let us share our story.
Yeah.
And go right to the start. So I was 3 years old when I moved to Sydney in Australia with my mum. My dad had already been here for a year, and he had a scholarship and he was studying, and that's how the move happened. The visa and all of that kind of paperwork stuff. I think we knew one family here, and they helped us move over. And from there, we built a really, really strong community of people. There were very few other families in our position that had moved here, and we got to know them simply through word of mouth and built this really strong community who are still with us today. The experience of moving to Australia in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s is very unique. I think Australia doesn't really have a strong line or lineage of modern Australia anyway, colonized Australia. It doesn't have a long lineage and history of culture and tradition and rituals to go off. Whereas being Indian, that is who we are. We have so much culture, so much tradition, so much history. And when we moved here, let's say that, you know, we were ready to let go of that and adapt to a new society and a new culture, there was actually nothing significantly strong enough to hold on to. So it's hard to let go of something when there's nothing to hold on to in place of that. So it was a really tough time. I didn't speak English. Kannada was my first language, my mother tongue, and I was put into daycare and I couldn't communicate if I was hungry or tired or sleepy. I remember my mum and I went for a walk in the first few days of moving to this country and we got lost because we couldn't read or write English. We couldn't read the signs, and it was like we were trapped in this little apartment until my dad came home and could take us out and we could explore and we could learn. And unfortunately, that was just how it was for quite a while. I think it took about a year for us to get familiar with our environment and learn enough English to be able to communicate. And that carried on through to school. And I remember being in primary school, maybe you just arrived on the scene or not even. I mean, kindergarten, you were still not there.
Yeah.
And I just remember it was really hard to make friends. You know, we grew up in Greater Western Sydney and the school I went to, didn't have that many brown kids. Maybe I could literally count on one hand. And you not being Caucasian was a connection. You know, it didn't even have to be that you were. Now kids go to school and go, oh, you're from, oh, India, where are you, which state are you from? And you can connect on that level. Back then, the Arab girl, the Pakistani girl, the, I don't know, Middle East, like any other country was, oh my God, common ground. We're not from here, and we related on that.
You're bonding over the fact that you're an immigrant child.
Literally. And if you think of a school of like, I don't know, 500 kids, there was five of us. And yeah, it was a really tough time. I was bullied. I didn't have friends that much in primary school because at home, we were still very much Indian. Yeah. Right? Like, my name's Jyotsna. Like, no one was able to say that at school. And I'm still grappling with that fact is people can't say my name. And I've shortened it to Joss and people still can't say it. People call me Josh. So at home, we were Indian and we ate on our little plates on the floor, which is a very traditional way of eating food for us, and with our hands. We put coconut oil in my hair. We did prayers and pujas and stuff on special occasions. We celebrated Diwali. Everything, all of this was foreign concept to my friends at school who I didn't have. But anyway, friends at school, and I didn't even have the vocabulary to explain to them what my experience at home was like. And there wasn't an alternative. You just kind of stuck around with it. So you got bullied for it sometimes. Other times it was curiosity and people wanted to learn a little bit more, which was nice, felt comfortable. And despite it all, we still built a community. We still kind of adjusted in our own little ways. We created a subculture. And when I say we, I'm talking about my parents who were my age, probably, just going into their 30s at that time. But also me, as a 5-year-old child, I was balancing this really, really strong, conflicting cultural identity. Where at home, I was Indian, and then at school, I had to be Australian, but no one really knew what it meant to be Australian, but it wasn't that, and it's not that, and I don't know what you're doing, but it's not that. And it was like, so confusing and traumatizing, and I think that has shaped who I am today. Hence, going through that transformation phase and saying, hold on a minute, why do I have those insecurities? Where did that thought process come from? Where did that belief system come from? Does it still serve me? Is that who I am still? Or is it that 5-year-old girl that went to school with coconut oil in her hair and got bullied for it? So it's been a really profound spiritual journey. And I think getting older and finding your own voice and becoming yourself, and similar to your experience, like traveling the world in my 20s and meeting people from different walks of life, and also our society changing. Our society's changed a lot dramatically in a good way for cultural acceptance. All of that has completely shifted who I am today and has allowed me to reflect and question and change my belief systems, which I'm very, very grateful for. But those early times do shape you.
Yeah.
Do you think you had a similar experience? Because you came on the scene in early 2000s.
Early 2000s.
It was still a very
Yeah.
similar cultural environment, context.
Yeah.
What was your
I think like what you described in terms of that juxtaposition between home life and school life,
Yeah.
very much true. But I think the biggest difference for me was I was born here.
Yep.
So it's all I know. Like, yes, I'm Indian by heritage, by culture, but also I was born here. So I kind of was like straight into like preschool was the first time I'd been out. Like, you'd went to school in India.
Yeah, I did. I did
And,
go to preschool in India.
I had never been. My first ever experience of other kids was Australian kids.
Mm.
And then moving into primary school, I did have the same experiences. Like, I had that one brown friend because he was the only brown kid in school. I still had that, but I was able to have like you knew I would go over to, like, I still remember, he might see it, Jaden, if you see it, but I would go over to his house, like, Australian kid.
Yeah.
And I had a slightly different experience. So that level of questioning things was not as apparent or transparent to me in my own head, because I was just, it was normal. Everything was normal to me. I wasn't fighting that necessarily. And also, I think the other big thing was by the time I'd come along, our parents had established themselves quite well. Like, you came here, you went rental house to rental house to rental house. And then by the time I came along, my parents had bought their first house. They lived there. Stability. Yeah, we had stability. We had our neighbors down the road who are still to this day like our closest family friends. Down the road, we had 20 different people around. We had people moving from India, staying in our house. Like, we were this like stable point, whereas you didn't have that necessarily. So I think because of that, I've never, until like very recently, had to actually question my cultural identity and how it drives me and how like it shapes my thinking.
But it has shaped your thinking.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, every experience I had growing up as a kid, even being one of two brown kids in my grade, I didn't realize it until recently, because at the moment I was just like, oh, it's just whatever, like, I'm brown and what?
What? What does that feel like?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And then
Can't relate.
Because even like we moved as well after, like, I went to high school in a very brown community.
Yes.
So I was never the odd kid out in my head until I was like, oh, like, now I'm started working and I have friends from Eastern Sydney who have just lived this completely different childhood to me. And to the point where I sometimes feel like, I don't understand this at all. Like, what you're saying, I don't get. Like, what do you mean your family used to go on like ski trips? Like, the first time I went to the snow, I was like 17 and it was with my friends or something. Like, stuff like that is now apparent to me. So I think that's the major difference between our childhoods, is that stability. Because I never felt out of place. And I think our parents had changed a lot as well by the time I came along.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, my mom was 21 when she had me.
Yeah.
Like, children.
And yeah, so it's 28 when she had me.
Yeah.
And at that point, they'd also assimilated quite well into Australia.
Yeah.
Dad had been working like corporate for ages.
Yeah.
And that had shaped him into an Australian man. And whatever that means.
Yeah, whatever that means.
And I think that really like made a big difference.
So if somebody was to ask you what like, are you Australian? What would you say to that?
Yeah,
now?
I would say I'm Australian with Indian heritage, because I think my cultural identity is Australian. I'm very in touch with my Indian roots.
Yes.
As you know, like, but I still feel quite Australian because that's all I know. I haven't seen the other side
Yeah.
at all.
No. You know, an experience you haven't had that we have had as a family, the three of my mum, dad, and I have had, is we had to give up our Indian citizenship to transfer to an Australian citizenship.
Yeah.
And we did that because we all had different last names. Because the concept of a last name doesn't really exist in India. It's not part of our culture to have a consistent last name that you track your heritage or your lineage with. You adopt your father's first name as your last name.
Yeah.
Wild concept. A lot of my friends now are like, what? But that's how it works. And you are the child of dad and then child of grandfather and so on. And it continues in this patriarchal way.
Yeah.
But moving here and traveling back to India with the baby, which you, the airport border security people just didn't get it.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean? You're one family, but you all have different last names? Like, and then the lines would take so long. And honestly, for the sake of the line, we all changed our last name. We just picked a name, basically. Yeah. I still remember our dad being like, should it be this or should it be that? Yeah. And I was like 7. I was like, that? Yeah. And that's how Shimoga came about. It's just a village in India, and like we have we have like ties there as a family. And
it's a crazy
that's our
concept.
last name now.
Yeah.
Isn't that wild?
It's a wild concept.
Can you think can you ask any other child that's not an immigrant to be like, hey, did you get to pick your last name? Yeah. And like, no. Do you mean like hyphenate it? And I'm like, no, pick. That's wild. So yeah. Okay, that's really interesting to me. And so when you were in school and growing up, you always felt a sense of belonging?
Most of the time, yeah. Like, obviously, there was times when, like, kids are mean, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, it's because I'm different. But for me, it was never because I was brown.
Right.
Like, that was not the thought in my head.
No, it's because you're bad at hide and seek or something, like, or handball. Yeah. Like, okay, right.
No, I was the, like, scrawny kid. Like, in that way. It was never, it's because of the color of my skin. Mm-hmm. I think that you had that experience where it was because you were Indian and you're a kid that had come from India.
So what is your sense of belonging now to maybe that's your workplace, uni, social context? Do you feel out of place? Do you feel like you belong? Do you ever question your place?
I actually don't think I ever have. Like, in terms of my cultural identity, I never have, because I've always, like, assimilated in. And also times have changed a lot since we grew up.
Of course.
Like, we grew up in Western Sydney, like Penrith, which at that time, very white neighborhoods. Yeah. But now, it's like, as we've grown up, it's like the most multicultural communities you could ever imagine. Even at work, it's like, it's just a very diverse community. So my thing has always been, okay, I don't really understand that experience or that culture, but I don't necessarily have to be close to these people. Because there's someone else who I relate to straight away on something else, some other point. And because of that, it's never been that much of a challenge. It's always been very smooth into it. But there's its own challenges growing up later. Like technology and social media and like, way more into it. Yeah. And stuff like that. But in terms of cultural assimilation, I've never felt it.
So do you feel any cultural burden or layers of complexity now? Correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I'm understanding your experience as opposed to mine is I was very conscious of who I was, where I was, how I was being treated, what I looked like as it was happening. Whereas you've only in hindsight reflected and gone, oh, I might have been singled out, but at the time I didn't realize, I didn't notice, and it didn't actually impact me because it wasn't a complex that I had internalized.
Exactly.
Whereas for me, it's a complex that I have internalized.
Yeah.
And paying a lot of money in therapy to break from.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's interesting. Would you agree
like
with that?
nail on the head. It's like now that I think about it, definitely happened, definitely existed. I just never thought about it.
Yeah.
It was never a thing.
And so now can you articulate how maybe there are some belief systems that you have or decision-making processes that you go through that have influenced or have been influenced?
I think one thing for sure is definitely like, and we'll get into this in later episodes, but the dating scene. I have this almost internalized racism where it's like, oh, it's because I'm Indian.
Okay.
Like you meet someone who's, grown up on the North Shore or something, you're like, oh, like never, because, I'm brown. Like we never be able to integrate, which is not necessarily true. It might not be true.
And it wasn't true when you were traveling from the conversations that we had, because you would meet people from different parts of Sydney that you wouldn't in Sydney interact with, but you did because you were traveling and you were studying abroad.
Yeah.
Similar to my experience too.
Exactly.
And the type of interaction we would have had at home in Sydney compared to the interaction that we had in Europe or in London or whatever was polar opposites.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The question of where you grew up, your cultural differences didn't even come up. In that setting, outside of Australia, we were Australian.
Yeah.
And that's what brought us together.
Exactly.
Whereas inside Australia, we differentiate ourselves based on where we've grown up.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because I can't even tell you why that happens. Like when I was traveling, no one ever was like, oh, but like, what do you mean? Like, you look different. Like there was like a few instances, but that was like locals. But when I met Australians in Europe, they would never, like, there was no difference. It's like, we're just Australians hanging out.
Yeah.
But for some reason, you come back and as soon as you start interacting, it happens. So I think that is like definitely still internalized, which I'm trying to get rid of. I'm going like, it's just the color of my skin.
Yeah.
Like I'm only brown because my parents are like colored brown, but I grew up as an Australian man.
Yeah.
With Indian heritage and Indian roots and Indian culture.
Yeah.
Which I have integrated into my life.
It's really funny that you say that. I'm almost envious that you have such a strong sense of self, because for me it's something I had to and do fight for internally, to say, no, this is who you are. You don't have to fit into a box. You know what I mean? And you can define your own box and so on. Something I found really interesting while I was traveling, because I lived in London for a couple of years, was when I met British Indian people, they were very certain and comfortable with their identity. And if you ask them, hey, are you, like, where are you from, or what's your background, they would say, oh, I'm Indian. And you go, oh, okay, so were you born here, your parents born here? And like, no, my great grandfather was born here, my great grandfather immigrated here, and like 3 generations have been born in England, and they are very comfortable to say, oh, but I'm Indian. And but then some other people go, no, I'm British. And you go, oh, okay, and so were you born here? And they go, yeah, my parents were born here. My grandparents actually migrated from Kenya, but they have Indian heritage. Like that conviction in who you are is, and where you come from, is something I'm very envious of people who have it. Yeah. Because it hasn't been my case. And when I talk to a lot of my friends who are, in their 30s and did immigrate over here with their parents, not born in the country, they have a similar experience. They are also culturally conflicted, and either sometimes go down the path of doubling down on that Indian culture and rejecting anything Western, or they go the other way and they completely reject Indian culture, which is a journey that I have been on myself, and I think I'm coming around, and I'm creating my own subculture for myself. Yeah. And it seems to be where a lot of my immigrant friends have landed, is they've created this micro culture that brings together a bit of this and a bit of that, in ways that works for them and their family and their community, which I think is really, really special.
Yep.
That's what makes our experience unique. But it also, we have a lot of overlap. We have a lot of similarities as well.
And it's like, so it's crazy to me because like we're only 7 years apart.
Yeah.
But my friends, we don't have that experience. Like where most of my friends who are born here have a very strong like, yeah, I'm Indian, but I'm Australian. And like merge the two into like this one identity that's like very strong. Like I don't think anyone could break my like sense of identity.
Yeah.
Because I know that I'm Australian and Indian.
Yeah.
And it's the way Americans describe it. Like they go, I'm American Indian. Like that's what I see. Like I'm Australian Indian.
Not Native American Indian.
Yeah. Like,
You're talking like
Indian. Indian. Like,
yeah. But I think that comes from, and I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but perhaps when you have this insecurity and this complex, these are the things that you notice.
Yeah.
Is when you go in England, when I was living in London, and you go to fill out a form and it asks for your ethnicity, the drop down says British Indian is an option in the drop down. I have never to date seen an Australian form that asks me to say whether I'm Australian Indian.
Yeah.
If the option doesn't exist, either I'm Australian or I'm Indian, I have to pick one.
Yeah.
And it's so weird when I'm filling out a form. It's like, what country was your passport issued? Australia. What's your nationality? Indian. You know, and it's disconnected.
Yeah.
So it's small things like that, I think, that I still notice in everyday life.
But I've never
You've never thought about that one?
No, I've never ticked the Indian.
Oh, you never ticked Indian?
Yeah. It's what is your like place of birth? Australia. What is your nationality?
Australian, yeah, and it aligns.
And I never even thought about scrolling down. Do you know what I mean? That's the difference. I've never once picked it, never even, got to that point. So it's just we've grown up together, but we have all these like differences.
Yeah.
But that's what I think makes this a good like platform.
Totally.
Because we're going to be able to bounce ideas off each other, discuss, argue, hopefully not, but argue points. Like,
no, I think we've grown up. We've evolved into really good friends in the last few years as you've found yourself, and I've, gone through my 20s and I can share my wisdom, but also learn from you being younger and being a little bit more naive and inexperienced, and that kind of fresh perspective is really helpful for me to go, actually, is it that complicated? Maybe it's not that complicated. Maybe I'm overthinking it, right? So I think that's why we're going to have great conversations, and I want to bring our friends into these conversations as well, because I reckon it would just elevate it as well, bringing in multiple perspectives, talking about our journeys. And I have so many friends who have such unique stories, wild stories, and you think, really, wow, you went through all of that and you're a functioning human being. Would you be willing to talk about it in front of lots and lots of people? They're like, do you know what? Yeah. I do. Yeah. So let's have conversations like that. Let's build a community of people who have similar stories to us, who have differing perspectives and opinions, which is completely fine. That's what makes it interesting. But we have a safe space where we can talk about it. And if you're sitting there going, oh my God, same, me too, or no, that's so funny. I've never thought about it that way. I'm going to give it some thought. Even that, if those are the questions and feelings that are coming up as you're listening to this is the space for us.
Yeah. And that's what we want. We want people to question us.
Yeah.
And because that's how we've grown over the last few years. We've questioned each other.
Yes.
Why do you think like that?
Absolutely.
Or is that right? Is that wrong? And we'll delve into this, and even in our next episode when we talk about a man's place.
Yeah.
That is where that topic has been derived from.
Yes.
Is you've questioned, why do you think like that? And I've had to go, oh, why do I think like that actually?
Yeah. And I think the other thing is that we're both in a place to be really brutally honest.
Yeah.
This is uncut. Like, this is not cut at all. This is totally raw. We're just sharing our story. And it's a journey that we've been on with our family. Like, our parents have evolved so much in the last decade, I would say, from my experience, because I moved out when I was 18.
Yeah.
So since then, I've been chipping away at them and asking them to question themselves. And to their credit, they have been open to that. And we've had some fantastic family discussions around, but why? You know, and hearing their perspective and going, I understand why you might feel that way, but it doesn't fit that, those values and that perspective doesn't fit the context we're in today.
Exactly.
And they sit there and they go, maybe, let me have a think about that.
Yep.
So that's a journey I was on my own until you've kind of grown into this young man with his own values and his own perspectives and his own life experiences. And now we team up. We team up and we question our family, not just our parents, our extended family too. It's to say, why do you think I have to get married? And they're like, but you're 30 and you're not married. Like, yeah, but why? Why do I have to? And sometimes it's a very intense debate and argument, and other times it's emotional and, you know, it's complicated. But let's share all of that. Let's be open, because we can't be the only people going through this.
And that's what I'm really excited to, is just share our story. Yeah. And knowing that there are definitely people out there that can relate. Yeah. And just having that someone gets me.
Someone gets me.
That's all our whole vision of this is, just for someone to listen to this and go, damn, someone gets me. Yeah. And
that is the voice I was craving. Yeah. That is the voice that I really, really lacked during a very intense, you know, reflective time in my life. And I was like, fuck, no one gets me. Yeah. Has no one been through this? And then as I start talking to people, like, no, I've been through that. Yeah. Oh, I've been through worse, honey. And you're like, what? Why isn't nobody talking about it?
Someone share with me so I don't feel like it's just me.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, well, before we end, I want to talk about why it's called Have You Eaten Yet? And I think you guys have gotten it at this point. Yeah. But just in case you haven't, it's how our families show us love as immigrant children, right? Cut up fruit, hot meals, overeating, whether you're Italian or Indian or Arab, like this is how you were shown that you were loved. So that's why it's called Have You Eaten Yet? Yep. So every episode, get a drink.
That's it.
Get some food, come sit with us, let's chat, let's debrief. Yeah. And let's interact. Bond over some shared generational trauma.
Yeah. Stay tuned for the next one.
Bye.